The anniversary gift. They say 25 years of marriage is something to celebrate. Silver anniversaries, toasts. Memories, respect. I believed that too. Until the moment I opened the box. The restaurant was everything my partner loved. Expensive, minimalist. The kind of place where the waiter says chef's recommendation like it's a threat. Crystal glasses, linen napkins folded like swans, soft jazz humming in the background. Thomas sat across from me, smiling in that polite, practiced way he used in front of clients. 25 years, he said, raising his glass. To us. I smiled back. Not because I felt happy, but because after 25 years, smiling had become muscle memory. Then came the gifts. A server approached first with his, a velvet tray, a heavy polished box. Thomas opened it slowly, enjoying the moment. Inside lay a Patek Philippe, steel and gold, understated, unmistakably expensive. The table next to us went quiet. 45,000, Thomas said casually, like he was reading the weather. Limited edition. He looked proud, not grateful, entitled. Then the waiter turned to me. A small paper envelope, thin, light. I already knew. The first move. Revenge doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with silence. The morning after our anniversary, Thomas left early for work. His new watch glinting under the kitchen lights as he buttoned his cuff. "You don't have to make breakfast," he said absently. "Just relax today." Relax. I watched him leave without saying a word. The door clicked shut. And the house, his house, as he liked to remind me, fell quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't clean the counters immediately. I didn't rush to answer emails for him. I didn't plan his week. Instead, I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop. 25 years of marriage teaches you many things. One of them is this. Men like Thomas forget who keeps the records. I started with the basics. Bank statements, investment accounts, old emails I had archived just in case. I wasn't snooping. I was reviewing a life I had helped build and never truly seen. What I found didn't shock me. It clarified everything. Thomas's success hadn't come from brilliance alone. It had come from timing, favors, and decisions made quietly behind closed doors. And in more than one of those decisions, my name appeared. Joint signatures, shared assets, legal acknowledgments he had never bothered to explain because he assumed I wouldn't understand them. He was wrong. By noon, I had made my first move, a small one, invisible. I transferred nothing, closed nothing, confronted no one. I simply updated my access. Passwords changed. Two-factor authentication enabled. Documents backed up twice. I created a digital folder and named it something harmless. Taxes 2012-2016. Thomas would never open it. That afternoon, I went out alone. No explanations, no permission. I drove to a cafe I used to visit years ago. Before my world had shrunk to Thomas's calendar, the woman behind the counter recognized me. "Wow," she said. "I haven't seen you in forever." I smiled. Life got busy. She didn't ask whose life. Smart woman? I made a phone call there, one I had rehearsed in my head for days. "Hi," I said when the line connected. "You probably don't remember me. This is Margaret Collins." A pause. Then a cautious voice. "I remember." Of course he did. Some people never forget the ones they underestimated. That night, Thomas came home late. He barely noticed I wasn't waiting with dinner. "Long day," he muttered, tossing his keys aside. "You wouldn't believe the meeting I had." I nodded. "Listen," he added, glancing at his watch. "I might be traveling more soon. You'll manage, right?" I looked at him. really looked at him. The man who thought love was measured in hierarchy, who believed provision replaced partnership, who confused loyalty with obedience. I always do, I said, and I meant it. 3 days later, I made my second move. This one left a trace. I booked a consultation. Not a divorce lawyer. Not yet. A financial advisor, one who specialized in long-term marital assets. The meeting lasted 2 hours. At the end, the woman leaned back in her chair and said something that stayed with me. "You're not powerless," she said. "You've just been convinced you are." And that evening, Thomas noticed something. "You seem different," he said cautiously. "Different how?" "Calmer," I smiled. That scared him more than anger ever could. Because the moment a woman stops reacting, she starts planning. And Thomas still believed this was his story. He didn't know he was already a supporting character. The mistake he didn't see coming. Thomas's biggest weakness wasn't arrogance. It was routine. He believed life moved in predictable patterns, that people stayed where he placed them. That silence meant surrender. So when I stopped asking questions, he assumed he had won. The mistake happened on a Thursday. Thomas was pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, irritation written across his face. "No, I said Friday," he snapped. "Yes, I know it's tight. Make it work." He ended the call and turned to me. "I'm hosting a small dinner tomorrow," he said casually. "Business associates. You'll need to be presentable. Presentable, not welcome, not included. Just acceptable decor. What time?" I asked. "7. Don't be late." I nodded. And that's when he made the mistake. He left his laptop open. I didn't rush. I didn't lean forward. I waited until he went upstairs, until the shower started, until the house hummed with the familiar sound of running water. Then I stood. The screen glowed softly. An email thread sat open, subject line, "Restructuring ownership, discretion required." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Not panic, focus." I read carefully. Thomas was negotiating a move, a quiet one. He was planning to shift assets into a separate entity, one that excluded me entirely. Not illegal, just strategic. At least he thought it was. What he hadn't considered was timing, or memory, or the fact that 25 years of marriage teaches you how a person thinks under pressure. I didn't forward anything, didn't screenshot. I memorized. Names, dates, language. The kind of language lawyers use when they think no one is listening. Then I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it. At dinner the next night, I played my role perfectly. I smiled, poured wine, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. One of the men leaned toward me and said, "You must be proud of Thomas. He's built something impressive." I met his eyes. "Yes," I said. "He has," Thomas beamed. He thought that smile was for him. Later that evening, as guests prepared to leave, one woman lingered. She was elegant, sharp, and observant. "You're very composed," she said quietly, as if we were sharing a secret. "Most people in your position aren't." "What position is that?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "The wife who knows more than she lets on." I returned the smile. "Experience teaches restraint." She nodded, understanding passing between us like a handshake. After the door closed behind the last guest, Thomas loosened his tie. "See?" he said smugly. "Everything's under control." I walked past him toward the stairs. "For now," I replied. He frowned. What does that mean? I stopped halfway up and looked back. It means, I said softly, that timing matters. He laughed. A short, dismissive sound. You worry too much. I didn't correct him. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because clarity has a way of keeping you awake. I knew what Thomas was planning. And I knew something else too. He was moving too fast. Rushed decisions always leave fingerprints. The next morning I made my third move. This one was subtle. I reached out to someone Thomas never thought I'd contact. Someone from before him. Someone who knew the company's origins better than anyone. The reply came within an hour. I wondered when you'd call, the message read. Thomas spent that week distracted. Meetings ran late. Calls took longer. His watch caught the light constantly, as if reminding me where his priorities lay. He didn't notice me watching. Learning. Waiting. Because the truth is this. Revenge doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives prepared. And Thomas had just shown me his hand. Perfect. When control starts slipping, Thomas noticed the change before he understood it. Meetings that once ended in firm handshakes now dragged into awkward pauses. Emails that used to get instant replies sat unread for hours. One investor canceled lunch. Another postponed indefinitely. At first, he blamed the market. Then he blamed incompetence. He never blamed me. It started with a phone call. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when his voice cut through the house like a crack of thunder. What do you mean they're reconsidering? He snapped into the phone. No, that's not possible. We already agreed. Silence. Then his tone shifted. Lower, controlled. I see. He ended the call and stood still, staring at nothing. I took a sip of my coffee. Bad news? I asked calmly. He looked at me startled, like he'd forgotten I existed. Just business, he muttered. Temporary complications. Temporary. That word again. By Wednesday, the complications multiplied. A deal he'd been bragging about for months was suddenly under review. A bank requested additional documentation, old documentation, the kind most people forget exists. Thomas started working late. Very late. He stopped wearing the watch. One evening, close to midnight, he finally cracked. He slammed his laptop shut and rubbed his temples. This doesn't make sense, he said. Someone's feeding them doubts. I leaned against the counter. Who would do that? I asked. He laughed bitterly. Competitors. Jealous people, snakes. He didn't notice how carefully I listened. The next morning, he called a meeting at home. Lawyers, advisors, faces tight with concern. I stayed upstairs, listening. They spoke in half sentences and lowered voices, but I caught enough. Original ownership. Early signatures. Spousal acknowledgement. One word landed harder than the rest. Consent. That afternoon, Thomas confronted me. You signed the early documents, didn't you? He demanded. I met his gaze evenly. Yes. Do you remember what you signed? Yes. He hesitated. Do you still have copies? I smiled. Why wouldn't I? For the first time in years, I saw fear flicker across his face. Just for a second. Then it vanished. He tried another tactic. Charm. That evening, he opened a bottle of expensive wine, lit candles, cooked dinner. A performance. You've always been my rock, he said softly. We've built this life together. I nodded. We have. He reached across the table and took my hand. I know the anniversary gift hurt you, he said. I was careless. Careless, not cruel. Not humiliating. Just careless. I want to make it right. I let him hold my hand. How? I asked. I'll transfer something into your name, he said quickly. A property, a fund. Whatever makes you feel secure. There it was. The panic wrapped in generosity. I pulled my hand back gently. Thomas, I said, do you know why I never asked for more? He frowned. Because you didn't need to. No, I replied. Because I was watching. He stiffened. Watching what? But he didn't ask. Because some questions are terrifying to hear answered. The next day, the final confirmation came. A quiet call. A simple sentence. He doesn't know how exposed he is. I closed my eyes. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. That night, Thomas slept on the couch. Not because we argued, but because he couldn't rest. He stared at the ceiling, phone clutched in his hand, refreshing emails that didn't come. I watched him from the doorway. 25 years of marriage. And for the first time, I was no longer reacting, I was directing. Because the truth Thomas still didn't understand was this. The $35 gift card wasn't the insult. It was the warning. And he had ignored it. The call that changed the balance. The call came at 6:42 a.m. Thomas hadn't slept. I knew that before I even looked at him, before the phone rang, before he reached for it with shaking fingers. He was already awake, waiting. The screen lit up. He stared at the name. Didn't answer. It rang again. This time he did. Yes? His voice was controlled but brittle. This is Thomas. I couldn't hear the other side, but I didn't need to. I saw his shoulders stiffen. Saw the color drain from his face. I don't understand, he said. That can't be right. A pause. Then, no, we resolved that years ago. Another pause. Longer. Who reopened it? He demanded. Silence stretched. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. She did? His eyes flicked to me, just for a second, then away again. He ended the call slowly, carefully, like the phone might explode if he moved too fast. I poured myself tea. Everything okay? I asked gently. He didn't answer at first. When he finally did, his voice sounded unfamiliar. They're auditing the original funding structure, he said. From the beginning. I nodded. That's thorough. He swallowed. They're questioning consent, he continued. Spousal consent. I took a sip. After 25 years, I said softly, it's important to be thorough. He stood abruptly. You did this, he said. Not accusing, realizing. I looked at him. No, I replied. I allowed it to happen. He ran a hand through his hair. Why? He asked. Why now? I set my cup down. Because this time, I said, you showed me exactly how little I mattered to you. That was just a gift, he snapped weakly. You're overreacting. I smiled. Was I? The next few days unfolded slowly, painfully. Banks froze accounts temporarily. Lawyers requested meetings urgently. Partners stopped returning calls altogether. Thomas paced constantly. He talked to himself, argued with ghosts. Once he laughed suddenly and said, this is nothing. I've survived worse. But his voice cracked. On the fourth day, he came home early. He sat across from me at the dining table. The same table where he'd once handed me the $35 gift card. I need your help, he said quietly. I waited. If you sign a statement, he continued, confirming everything was mutual, they'll back off. There it was. Not an apology, a request. I folded my hands. What happens if I don't? I asked. He hesitated. They could dismantle everything. Everything. Not us. Not me. Everything. I stood and walked to the drawer. Pulled out the envelope, the same one I had kept untouched for weeks. I placed it in front of him. Inside was the gift card, still unused. He stared at it, confused. You told me it was the thought that counted, I said. So I thought about it. He looked up, and I realized something. What? He asked hoarsely. That moment, I said, was the first time I saw you clearly. That evening, Thomas slept in the guest room. The next morning, he left without a word. By afternoon, the headlines broke. Nothing scandalous, nothing dramatic, just facts, revisions, investigations, structural changes, quiet dismantling, the kind that doesn't trend but destroys legacies. Late that night, my phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time, then typed back one sentence. We already did. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully. Because revenge isn't about humiliation. It's about balance. And the scales had finally stopped trembling. The last attempt. Thomas didn't give up quietly. Men like him never do. 2 days after the audits became public, he showed up at the house unannounced, early evening. Suit wrinkled, tie missing. He looked smaller somehow. Less polished. Less certain. I just want to talk, he said from the doorway. I didn't step aside immediately. I'm busy, I replied. He swallowed. Please. That word sounded foreign coming from him. I let him in. He paced the living room like a stranger. I've spoken to the board, he began. They're nervous, overreacting. I said nothing. They don't understand the full picture, he continued. If you just clarify things, this can all calm down. Clarify. Such a gentle word for erasing the truth. What exactly do you want me to clarify? I asked. He stopped pacing. That you were always supportive, he said quickly. That every decision was mutual. I tilted my head. Was it? He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Margaret, he said, lowering his voice, think about what you're doing. This affects more than just me. Does it? I asked. Or does it finally include me? His jaw tightened. You're emotional right now, he snapped. You're letting one moment define everything. I didn't raise my voice. I'm letting 25 years speak, I said. He changed tactics. I'll transfer half, he blurted. Assets, property, cash, whatever you want. I almost laughed. Now you want to negotiate? I asked. He stepped closer. We built this together. No, I corrected calmly. You built it. I maintained it. He flinched. That night he left angry. But desperation doesn't rest. The next morning I received a call from someone unexpected, an old colleague of Thomas's. I thought you should know, the man said carefully. Thomas is trying to move funds offshore, quietly. I thanked him. Then I made my move. By noon, the authorities were involved. Not because I accused him, because I provided documentation, original filings, timeline inconsistencies, patterns. Nothing illegal on its own. But together, a map. Thomas found out by evening. He called me. This time there was no charm left. You did this, he hissed. You ruined me. I listened. You're enjoying this, he accused. Aren't you? I thought about that. No, I said honestly. I'm finished. The following days were brutal. For him, subpoenas arrived. Accounts were frozen, again. Board members resigned. The watch disappeared from his wrist. One night he showed up again, this time drunk. I loved you, he said bitterly. I looked at him. No, I replied. You relied on me. There's a difference. He left without arguing, because there was nothing left to argue over. A week later, Thomas resigned. Officially. Personal reasons, the press release said. I read it calmly, then deleted it. That evening, I sat alone at the dining table. The same place, the same silence. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. Thomas had made his last attempt and failed, because the truth he learned too late was this. Control only works when the other person still believes you have it. When the world stops listening. The world didn't explode when Thomas resigned. It didn't even flinch. That was the cruelest part. The headlines were brief. CEO steps down amid structural review. Leadership change at Crosswell Industries. No scandals. No dramatic footage. No sympathy. Just another powerful man replaced by another name. Within 48 hours, someone else sat in his chair. And the company kept breathing. Thomas noticed it before anyone told him. His phone stopped ringing. Not suddenly, but steadily. A missed call here. An unanswered text there. By the end of the week, the silence was complete. He refreshed his inbox obsessively. Nothing. The same people who once needed him for approvals, connections, introductions, now needed nothing. I heard about it secondhand. A former colleague called me. He came by the office, she said carefully. Unannounced. I said nothing. He just stood there, she continued, like he expected something to happen. What happened? I asked. She hesitated. Security asked him to leave. I closed my eyes. Thomas didn't come home after that. Instead, he moved into a short-term apartment downtown. Smaller. Temporary. Anonymous. The kind of place no one notices. For the first time in his adult life, he was just another man in a building full of them. Days later, he sent me a message. Not angry. Not begging. Just confused. Do you remember when we were nothing? I stared at the screen. Yes, I remembered. But I didn't answer. He tried again. I don't know who I am without the work. That message stayed unread longer, because some realizations are meant to echo. Meanwhile, my own life shifted quietly. I took long walks, read books I'd once put down for his schedule, met friends I hadn't seen in years. One afternoon, someone asked me, "How are you holding up?" I surprised myself by answering honestly. Relieved. A week later, Thomas finally called. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? I said calmly. There was silence on the other end. Then his voice, soft, stripped of authority. I saw myself today, he said. I waited. In a reflection, he continued. In a store window. Another pause. I didn't recognize the man staring back. I closed my eyes. Identity, I said gently, should never be rented. He exhaled sharply. You knew this would happen, he said. Yes, I replied. Eventually. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. For the first time, there was no performance. Just a man realizing that power had been the only language he'd ever learned to speak, and now no one was listening. That night I stood in the kitchen holding the gift card, still unused, still worth $35. I cut it in half, not angrily, carefully, then threw it away, because its purpose was complete. Thomas didn't call again that week, or the next. And something else became clear. He wasn't angry at me anymore. He was grieving himself. Because the hardest loss isn't money. It's the moment you realize you built your entire self around something that was never permanent. The man he couldn't escape. Thomas stopped running out of options before he stopped running from himself. It happened quietly. No dramatic breakdown. No public apology. Just a slow, uncomfortable realization that there was nowhere left to hide. He started walking. Every morning. No driver. No assistant. No meetings to rush to. Just streets he had never noticed before. People passed him without recognition. No nods. No second glances. For years, his identity had entered rooms before he did. Now he entered alone. One morning, he sat on a bench outside a small cafe, the kind he would have dismissed as not worth the stop. He ordered black coffee. Paid in cash. The barista didn't know his name. Didn't care. And that hurt more than losing the company he ever had. Across the street, a man argued loudly into his phone. Thomas flinched. The tone was familiar. Too familiar. He stood up abruptly and walked away, heart pounding. For the first time, he saw himself clearly. Not as the visionary, not as the provider, but as the man who had mistaken control for connection. That afternoon, he opened an old box. Photographs, receipts, notes written in handwriting that wasn't his, mine, schedules I'd kept, lists I'd managed, decisions I'd softened. He sat on the floor for hours reading, understanding. That night he typed a message, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. On the third attempt, he finally sent it. I don't want anything. I just want to say I see it now. I read it once. Then again, and set the phone down. Days passed. Then weeks. Thomas didn't reach out again. Instead, he did something unexpected. He resigned from the board seat he'd managed to keep. No press release, no explanation. Just a letter. In it, he wrote, "Leadership without accountability is theft." The industry noticed, quietly, respectfully. Meanwhile, my own life continued unfolding. I took a class, started consulting on my own terms. People listened when I spoke, not because of his name, but because I knew what I was talking about. One evening, Thomas showed up at the house, not unannounced. He'd asked first. I let him in. He looked different. Not weaker, just human. "I'm not here to ask," he said. "I'm here to acknowledge." I waited. "You were right," he continued. "And I was wrong. No excuses, no conditions, just truth." He stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I needed to say it." I nodded. "Thank you," I replied. And meant it. After he left, I realized something surprising. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was complete. Because revenge had never been my goal. Clarity was. And clarity, once reached, doesn't demand applause. It simply lets you move on. What he left behind. Legacies don't collapse overnight. They erode quietly, methodically, from the inside out. Thomas believed his greatest achievement was the company. He was wrong. His greatest achievement and his greatest mistake was believing the company would remember him. 3 months after his resignation, the board made an announcement. No press conference, no dramatic statements, just a formal release buried in the business section. Crosswell Industries would undergo a strategic realignment. Translation: everything Thomas had built was being rewritten. New leadership, new values, new language. His name appeared once in the acknowledgments. Investors applauded the changes. Employees spoke cautiously, then openly. A new internal review revealed patterns. Not crimes, not scandals, but culture. Decisions made without consultation. Credit taken silently. Voices sidelined politely. None of it illegal. All of it documented. I was contacted shortly after. Not by reporters, by a committee. They asked if I would be willing to speak privately about my experience. I agreed. Not to punish, but to correct the record. In that room, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I spoke plainly. About support mistaken for silence. About partnership mistaken for entitlement. About how power warps perception. They listened. They took notes. And when I finished, one of them said quietly, "This explains more than we expected." Weeks later, changes followed. Subtle but permanent. New policies, shared credit structures, mandatory co-signatures on major decisions. Thomas's fingerprints faded. He noticed. Of course he did. He sent one final message. "They're erasing me." I read it and replied, "They're correcting the story." He didn't answer, because there was nothing left to argue. The house changed, too. I sold it, not out of anger, out of intention. I kept what was mine, left what wasn't. The day I handed over the keys, I walked through every room once more. Not with regret, with release. I moved into a smaller place, lighter, mine. For the first time, every decision reflected me. Not compromise, not accommodation, not endurance. Thomas faded from the public eye. Not disgraced, just irrelevant. The most painful place for a man who once believed attention was proof of worth. One evening, I found an old photo while unpacking. Our early years. Before ambition hardened into armor, I studied it for a long time, then put it away. Some memories are meant to be acknowledged, not preserved. The world moved on. Companies restructured. People adapted. Life continued. As it always does. And that was the final consequence Thomas never anticipated. Not revenge, not punishment, but replacement. What I chose. People often ask how it feels to win. They expect fireworks, applause, a dramatic ending where everything feels justified. The truth is quieter than that. I woke up early the morning my new life truly began. No alarms, no urgent emails, no schedule built around someone else's priorities. Just light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. My curtains. I made coffee slowly, sat by the window. Watched the city wake up without needing me to manage it. For the first time in decades, my time belonged to me. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anything. Not to Thomas. Not to the world. I rebuilt it because I finally understood something essential. Staying silent for too long teaches people how to treat you, and choosing yourself teaches them you're done being taught. I started consulting, not as someone's shadow, but as a voice. Companies listened, not because of my past, but because experience, when owned, commands respect. I was invited into rooms I once prepared for others. This time I spoke. And people took notes. Occasionally, someone asked about Thomas. I answered honestly. He's part of my past. No bitterness. No nostalgia. Just accuracy. One afternoon, I passed a jewelry store. A watch display shimmered in the window. Gold, steel, precision. For a moment, I stopped. Not because it tempted me, but because it reminded me of how easily people mistake value for worth. I walked on. Months later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From Thomas. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't ask for reconciliation. He wrote, "You were the constant I built everything on. I didn't realize foundations deserve recognition, too." I folded the letter carefully and placed it away. Some acknowledgments come too late to change the past, but just in time to release it. On the evening of what would have been our 26th anniversary, I did something symbolic. I booked a table at the same restaurant, alone. I ordered what I wanted. Raised a glass, not to loss, not to revenge, but to clarity. Because revenge is loud, but self-respect? Self-respect speaks softly and lasts longer. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. The most powerful response to being undervalued isn't retaliation. It's independence. I didn't destroy Thomas. I didn't have to. I simply stopped holding him up. And that made all the difference. End of story. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Stories like this aren't about punishment. They're about remembering your worth and choosing yourself, even when it's long overdue.